stop what you're doing for a second, because this isn't just a jersey change. When Deion Sanders got his number 2 back, most people probably scrolled right past it. Just another off-season update, just another small detail. But if you really understand what's happening in Cleveland right now, you know this is way bigger than that. That number isn't just a number. It's identity. It's the same 2 legendary image that followed him from Jackson State to Colorado. It's what fans recognize instantly. It's what built his brand, his presence, and his confidence. And bringing it back now, right at this moment, doesn't feel random. It feels like a statement. Because let's be real, this offseason hasn't been quiet around him. There's been noise, doubt, questions about where he stands. Reports suggest some media voices haven't exactly been convinced, pushing narratives about competition, readiness, and whether he truly fits as the guy moving forward. And normally, that kind of pressure gets loud. Players respond, they defend themselves, they try to control the narrative. But Deion, he hasn't done any of that. No back and forth, no reactions, no distractions. Just silence and work. And that's what makes this moment hit different. Because while everyone else is debating what he might become, he's moving like someone who already knows what's coming next. And getting that number back, that's not just comfort, it's control. It's stepping into his identity at the exact time everything around him is being questioned. That's not coincidence. That's timing. So now the real question isn't why he changed his number. It's why it happened right now, right when the pressure is building, right when the narratives are forming, and right when the spotlight is starting to shift. Because if you're paying attention, this might not be a small detail at all. This might be the first sign that something much bigger is already in motion. This is where people get it completely wrong, because they think it's just a number. When Deion Sanders got number 2 back, most fans saw it as a simple jersey switch, something cosmetic, something that doesn't really impact what happens on the field. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Because for Deion, that number isn't just part of the uniform, it's part of who he is. That too has followed him through every stage of his rise. From Jackson State, where he started building his name, to Colorado, where he became a national spotlight figure. It became his identity, his signature, the symbol tied to everything he represents: confidence, control, and presence. And when a player is that connected to something, taking it away or getting it back matters more than people realize. This is psychological. Athletes operate on rhythm, confidence, and familiarity. The smallest details can impact how locked in they feel. And wearing a number that represents your journey, that's not just comfort, it's power. It's stepping into the version of yourself you've already proven you can be. That's why this move hits different. Because it's not about starting over. It's about continuing something. It's about bringing that same mindset, that same energy, that same identity into a completely new level, without losing what made it work in the first place. And the timing makes it even more interesting. This isn't happening randomly in a quiet moment. It's happening while questions are being asked, while narratives are forming, while people are debating where he stands and what his future looks like. And right in the middle of all that, he reclaims his number. That's not just symbolic, that's strategic. Because while others are trying to define him, he's reinforcing exactly who he already is. No adjustments to fit expectations, no shift to match outside opinions. Just alignment. And when a player reaches that level, where identity, confidence, and preparation all connect, that's when things start to change fast. Because now, it's not just about talent. It's about presence. So yeah, on the surface, it looks like a jersey this situation goes way deeper than football. Because since Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland, it hasn't just been about learning a system or competing for a role. There's been a different kind of weight attached to him, one that doesn't always show up on stat sheets or highlight clips. And you can feel it. There's been a lot of conversation surrounding him. Reports suggest some media voices have been more critical than expected, questioning his readiness, his role, and even where he fits long-term. Now, to be fair, every young quarterback faces scrutiny. That's part of the NFL. But this feels louder, more constant, almost like the conversation never really gives him room to just develop naturally. And that's where things start to get complicated. Because when a player walks into that kind of environment, it creates pressure from multiple directions. Not just proving yourself on the field, but dealing with expectations, narratives, and opinions that are forming before you even get a real opportunity to settle in. And here's the key part: he hasn't responded to any of it. No public pushback, no interviews trying to correct the narrative, no distractions. Just silence. And that silence tells you everything. Because instead of getting pulled into the noise, he's choosing to operate differently. While conversations are happening around him, he's staying locked into his own process, working, preparing, building. And that creates a gap. On one side, you've got speculation. On the other, you've got discipline. And over time, that gap starts to show. Now there's also been buzz among fans. Some believe the criticism is being overdone. Others think it's just part of the league testing a young player early. Either way, the situation has created tension. Because when expectations, doubt, and potential all collide at the same time, something has to give. And that's why this moment matters. Because this isn't just about how he plays, it's about how he handles everything around him. The noise, the pressure, the uncertainty. And so far, he hasn't flinched, which might be the most important sign of all. Because in situations like this, talent gets you noticed. But composure under pressure, that's what separates players who compete from players who eventually take control. But here, where the story really starts to split, because what's being said publicly doesn't fully match what's actually happening. When you look at the conversation around Shedeur Sanders, it almost feels like two completely different narratives are running at the same time. On one side, you've got the media. There's been a lot of talk, questions about readiness, debates about competition, and constant speculation about where he truly stands. Reports suggest voices like Jason Lloyd and others have leaned more towards skepticism, raising doubts, and keeping the conversation centered around uncertainty. Now, to be fair, that's part of the job. Media is supposed to question, analyze, and challenge. But here's the issue. When the same tone keeps repeating, it starts to shape perception. And perception spreads fast. Because once a narrative takes hold, whether it's fully accurate or not, it becomes the lens people use to judge everything else. Every throw gets overanalyzed, every mistake gets magnified, every positive gets questioned. And that's exactly what some fans are starting to notice. There's been growing discussion online, with people asking whether the criticism is truly balanced, or if it's leaning too heavily in one direction. Some believe it's normal evaluation. Others think it's creating doubt before he's even had a fair chance to establish himself. But here, where it gets interesting. While all of that is happening publicly, the reality behind the scenes seems quieter. Because instead of responding, instead of pushing back, instead of trying to correct the narrative, Shedeur has done none of that. He hasn't engaged. He hasn't reacted. He hasn't even acknowledged it. And that creates a contrast you can't ignore. One side is talking constantly, building storylines, debating possibilities, shaping opinions. The other side, just working, And over time, that difference becomes hard to overlook. Because when performance eventually shows up, narratives don't always hold. They get tested, and if they don't match reality, they fall apart. So right now, we're in that in-between phase, where the story being told and the story being built don't fully align yet. But if that gap keeps growing, then sooner or later, one of those narratives is going to collapse. And when it does, everyone will finally see which version was real all along. And here, where the conversation takes a turn, because a lot of fans are starting to notice something that doesn't quite add up. And it's not about talent. It's about how different players are being treated. When you look at how Deion Sanders is being discussed, there's this constant sense of doubt surrounding him. Questions about whether he's ready, whether he needs more time, whether he truly deserves to step into a leading role. Now, to be fair, that kind of scrutiny isn't unusual for young quarterbacks. But here's the part that people are questioning. Why does it feel heavier in this situation? Because if you look across the league, other quarterbacks in similar positions are often given something different. They're given room to grow, room to make mistakes, room to develop without every single moment being turned into a major talking point. With Deion, it feels like that margin is smaller. Every move gets analyzed, every performance gets debated, every opportunity feels like it comes with added pressure. And fans have started pointing that out. There's been a lot of buzz online, with some saying the expectations around him feel stricter than usual. Others believe it's just the spotlight that comes with his name and presence. And to be fair, that could be part of it too. Because when you carry that level of attention, everything gets amplified. But that doesn't change the core question. Is the evaluation truly balanced? Or is it being influenced by perception before the full picture is even seen? Because here's what makes this interesting. Despite all the questions, despite all the skepticism, there's still clear evidence of ability. The production, the flashes, the moments where you can see exactly why there's so much attention around him. And yet, the conversation keeps circling back to doubt. That's why this feels different. Not because criticism exists, but because of how consistently it shows up compared to the positives. And over time, that creates a gap between what people are seeing and what they're being told to believe. Now, none of this confirms anything. It doesn't mean one side is completely right or completely wrong, but it does raise an important point. Because in situations like this, perception can shape reality, at least temporarily, until performance steps in and forces everything to reset. And if that moment comes, then the real question won't be whether he was ready. It'll be why so many people questioned it in the first place. But here's the part that completely changes how you should look at this situation. And honestly, it's something a lot of people are ignoring. Because when it comes to Deion Sanders, the conversation usually focuses on results. What did he look like? How did he perform? Was he ready? But very few people stop and ask the most important question. What kind of opportunity did he actually get? Reports suggest that during key moments, Deion wasn't consistently working with the first team. That means limited reps with the starting offensive line, limited chemistry with primary receivers, and less exposure to real game speed preparation. And in the NFL, that matters more than anything. Because quarterback isn't just about talent, it's about timing, rhythm, and trust. You build that through reps, real reps, the kind where you're working with the same players, reading the same defenses, and preparing for real situations. Now imagine trying to prove yourself without that. It's like being thrown into a test you weren't fully prepared for. You understand the material, you've shown flashes before, but the environment, the setup, it's not aligned for you to succeed at your best level. And then, when things don't look judgment. That's where the disconnect starts. Because on the surface, people see the outcome. They see the mistakes, the hesitation, the moments where things didn't click. But underneath that, there's a different story, one about development, opportunity, and timing. And that story doesn't get talked about enough. To be fair, none of this is officially confirmed as the sole reason behind anything. There are always multiple factors in play, but it's been said enough to raise a real question about how fair the evaluation actually was. Because if a quarterback isn't given consistent first-team reps, are we really seeing his full potential? Or just a limited version of it? And that's what makes this so important. Because if the situation changes, if the reps increase, if the system aligns, if the opportunity becomes real, then the version of schedule people have been judging might not even be the version that shows up moving forward. And if that happens, then everything we thought we knew about him could shift overnight. But here's the part that people keep skipping over. The actual proof has been there the entire time. When it comes to Deion Sanders, the conversation keeps circling around questions. Is he ready? Can he lead? Does he really have it? But those questions ignore what he's already done. This isn't a player trying to figure things out from scratch. This is someone who's already built a track record. He didn't just show flashes in college, he produced high-level production, big moments, real leadership when it mattered most. He won the Golden Arm Award, something only top-tier quarterbacks earn. That alone puts him in a category that demands attention, not hype, recognition. And then there's the numbers. We're talking about a quarterback who threw for thousands of yards, operated under pressure, and still delivered. Not in perfect conditions either, often in situations where protection broke down and plays had to be extended. That matters because it shows something deeper than stats. It shows composure. It shows decision-making when things aren't clean. It shows the ability to adjust when the play doesn't go as planned. And those are the traits that actually translate to the next level. But here, where it gets interesting, those same strengths don't always show up clearly when someone is placed in a limited role early on, when reps are restricted, when timing isn't built, when chemistry isn't there yet. So what people end up seeing isn't the full picture. They see moments instead of patterns. They see outcomes instead of context. And that's how the narrative starts to drift away from reality. Because if you go back and actually look at what he's already proven, not what's being debated now, but what's already been done, the foundation is there. The ability is there. The experience is there. And more importantly, the mindset is there. Now, does that guarantee anything at the next level? No. But it changes the conversation. Because instead of asking whether he has what it takes, the real question becomes whether he's been put in the right position to show it consistently. And if that position finally aligns, then everything people have been overlooking might suddenly become impossible to ignore. And this is where things quietly start to shift, because the tone around this situation isn't the same anymore. At first, everything felt uncertain. Questions were everywhere, doubt was loud. The conversation around Deion Sanders was filled with hesitation. Is he ready? Is he the guy? Is this even his team? But now, that tone is changing. Not dramatically, not in a way that grabs headlines, but subtly, consistently, almost like people are starting to adjust without saying it out loud. Reports suggest that behind the scenes, momentum may be building. Nothing officially confirmed, no clear announcement, but small signals are starting to line up. The kind of signals that don't mean much on their own, but together, they start to tell a story. And that story feels different than it did before. Because now, instead of constant doubt, you're starting to hear more balanced takes. Instead of outright skepticism, there's hesitation, then curiosity, then quiet acknowledgement. That shift matters, because in situations like this, narratives don't flip overnight, they evolve. Slowly, carefully, almost like people are preparing themselves for a reality they weren't fully ready to accept at first. And you can see it happening. Some of the same voices that were once fully critical are now adding qualifiers, softening their tone, leaving room for the possibility that things might not play out the way they originally expected. That's not random, that's adjustment. And adjustment usually happens when the evidence becomes harder to ignore. Now, to be clear, nothing is finalized. No starting role has been officially handed out. The competition, at least publicly, still exists. And in the NFL, things can always change. But here's the key difference now. It doesn't feel like pure uncertainty anymore. It feels like anticipation. Like something is building behind the scenes, and the people closest to it are starting to recognize it before everyone else does. And that's when situations like this become interesting. Because once momentum starts shifting in that direction, it rarely goes backward. Confidence builds, trust grows, opportunities increase. And before you know it, the question isn't if it's happening anymore. It's when everyone else finally catches up to what's already been set in motion. And when you step back and look at the full picture, this is where everything finally clicks. Because this was never just about a jersey number. When Deion Sanders took back number 2, it wasn't just a personal preference or a cosmetic change. It was a signal, a quiet one, but a powerful one. A reminder of who he is, where he's been, and what he's bringing into this next stage. Identity matters. Confidence matters. Timing matters even more. And right now, all three of those things are lining up at once. Think about everything we've just gone through. The pressure, the narratives, the questions about opportunity, the constant debate around his readiness, all of it building at the same time. And in the middle of that, he doesn't respond with words. He responds by stepping fully back into himself. That's not random. That's control. Because while the outside world is still trying to figure him out, he's already locked into who he is. No adjustments for critics. No changes to fit expectations. Just alignment between his identity, his mindset, and his preparation. And that's where situations like this start to turn. Because once a player reaches that point where everything internally is clear, the outside noise stops having the same impact. Doubt doesn't slow them down. Pressure doesn't shake them. It sharpens them. Now, to be clear, nothing is guaranteed. No outcome is locked in. The NFL doesn't hand anything out just because the moment feels right. But momentum, that's real. And right now, it feels like momentum is building in a very specific direction. So maybe the biggest mistake people are making is treating this like a small detail. Because sometimes the smallest moves tell you the most. And sometimes the moment everything shifts doesn't come with a headline. It comes quietly, like a number being reclaimed, like an identity being re-established, like a player stepping into exactly who he's been preparing to become this entire time. So the real question is whether Deion Sanders is ready. It's whether everyone else is ready to recognize what's already starting to happen. Because if this is what it looks like before the season even begins, then what happens next might not feel like a surprise at all. It might feel inevitable.